Hello, and welcome back to our podcast. I'm the disturbed Southern Belle.
And I'm the gentleman.
This week we're going to be talking about some of the twisted fairy tales that we grew up with and the ones that maybe are a little lesser known to some of you. We're going to start our journey by talking about the Brothers Grimm. Many of you have probably heard many of their tales. They include things such as Cinderella, the Frog Prince, Little Red Riding Hood, Rapunzel, Rumpelstiltskin, Sleeping Beauty, and Snow White. Many of you will probably know these from some of the more famous Disney movies. I'm sure many of us have watched those growing up and also probably just heard the story. But we're going to take a look at some of the origins and some of the real stories behind these. Now, the Grimm brothers didn't actually write these stories. They gathered them from German folklore, Danish folklore, things like that from around the world. And they compiled them into a book of fairy tales. I thought we might start out by talking a little bit about the Brothers Grimm and how they grew up and how they started doing what they do.
So their origins.
Exactly. So we're going to start with, of course, their names, Jacob and Wilhelm, and they were German academics. And so they went out and they collected and published all this folklore. They are the ones that actually helped popularize these stories and helped to spread them around the world. And of course, many of them we probably would have never even heard had it not been for them. So they spent their formative years in a city called Hanau, which is part of the Frankfurt-Rhine-Main metropolitan region. They experienced great poverty growing up after the death of their father. I believe they were around 9 and 11, so roughly when their father died. And because of this, because he was the main breadwinner, of course, they were very poor growing up. Even though they were very poor growing up, both brothers were able to attend the University of Marburg. And during that time is when they became interested in German folklore. Now, they did attend some other schools and things of that nature, and we really could spend a great deal of time talking about all their background, but I thought we would just hit more of the high point.
We could probably make an entire episode just talking about their story.
Right, we could.
Without even ever mentioning
Exactly.
their stories.
Oh, yeah, exactly. It's very long. There's a lot on them. But so there was this rise of romanticism in the 19th century. This period was when stories started focusing more on art and on emotions of an individual than just telling a story in general. So that helped open the way for a larger audience and interest in the different folklore that they were actually going to start compiling into these fairy tale books. And these books have endured for years, of course, and they're now available in more than 100 translations, as well as film adaptations, of course, like Disney movies and different mainstream movies that have been made into these stories.
I am wondering whether the actual more twisted stories themselves have any sort of film or any adaptations like
there
that.
There probably are some, but they would probably...
They'd probably be a lot harder to
right,
find.
They would be, and they would lean more towards darker and horror, right?
Yeah.
They would, definitely. So, in their early years, they were educated at home by private tutors and received strict instruction as Lutherans, which is a branch of the Protestant faith. And this helped them to create a lifelong religious faith. And as they grew older, they did attend some local schools. And of course, as they grew up, they were left without a male provider because their father had died. But they began to rely entirely on each other and became very, very close as they grew up. So while they were attending the University of Marburg, they struggled due to their poverty and social standing. They were not able to attend many of the social activities or enjoy a normal social life like some of the other students. And because of this allowed them to excel at their studies, and they were able to spend more time studying and also pursuing other goals. And then after they graduated, they went on to publish their first volume of 86 folktales in 1812, which was quickly followed by 2 volumes of German legends. Later, they also went on to publish works about Danish and Irish folktales and also some Norse mythology, such as we've already covered.
That's actually very interesting and kind of a nice tie-in.
Right. I didn't even know that they had done anything dealing with like mythology or anything. So that's actually really cool.
Kind of a good way to get people to at least be interested in checking out our last episodes.
Right, exactly. Then later in history, some of their works were also used by Nazi Germany to promote anti-Semitic beliefs. These stories include titles like The Girl Who Was Killed by Jews and The Jew Stone. And these stories tell false stories of something called blood libel, which is what was believed that Jewish people would murder Christian children in order to use their blood in rituals, which was, of course, completely false, but it was something that was used during that time as Nazi propaganda.
Plus, around that time, like, devil worshipping and stuff like that, rituals were kind of well known
Yeah,
worldwide.
right. So,
It would, I imagine it wouldn't be too hard to get people to believe stuff like
no, I
that
mean, right.
if
People,
rituals requiring sacrifices
right.
were as big as they were.
Exactly. People would just kind of follow whatever anyone told them anyway. So, yeah. So, we're going to start with a few of the lesser known, but kind of disturbing or sad Grimm fairy tales. And the first one is called The Mouse, the Bird, and the Sausage. Now, some of you may have heard this one, you may have not. So, we're going to,
Yeah, I've read this one recently and it's
it,
kind of sad,
it is.
very twisted.
It is. It's very twisted. It's
It
very
sets
sad.
a good example as to what you can expect from the rest of this episode.
Right. And how different fairy tales were as opposed to what we grew up with. There's not a happily ever after in most of these stories. So in this story, there's a mouse, a bird, and a sausage, and they live in a house together, and they form sort of a partnership. The bird was to fly into the forest each day and fetch wood, and the mouse carried water, made the fire, and set the table, and the sausage did the cooking. So one day the bird meets another bird, and this bird criticizes the bird for working so hard while the others rested at home. The mouse, after carrying the water and making the fire, then could sit in the parlor and rest until it was time to set the table, and the sausage only had to watch the cooking pot, and then when mealtime approached, would slither through the porridge or vegetables so that everything was salted and seasoned to eat.
Right off, I can already say this is starting out kind of odd.
It is.
Just the way that they prepare this stuff.
It is very strange. It's not your typical fairy tale. I mean, this is not a normal partnership by any stretch anyway, but that's what they decided was the best for each one. And the jobs worked out well. They worked well together. Everything was going perfectly. Nothing was amiss or anything. There was really no reason for any changes. The bird was basically the leader of the bunch, and they decided that he was through being the slave. So he basically assigns all of them new jobs, and they argued about this, but they ultimately agreed, okay, they would do it. So the next day, the mouse was to be the cook, and the sausage was to go into the wood to gather wood, which I have no clue how the sausage would do this. I'm assuming they have arms. I don't know. After some hours passed and the sausage had not returned, the bird decided to go look for her and found that a dog had claimed her and was carrying her away, claiming to have discovered forged letters on her that would mean she had forfeited her life. Now, I'm guessing she had pockets. I don't know where this came into play. I have no clue.
This
But
is actually making me think that this in itself is some sort of
it could
propaganda.
have been.
It seems like the dog in this scenario is representing some sort of government figure.
Probably, but it doesn't specifically say that. So, but yeah, that definitely would make you think something along those lines. Absolutely.
It's definitely screaming that there's some hidden meaning.
Right.
At least to me it
It,
is.
it does. It does. It seems like something else is going on here. But anyway. So the bird returns home and tells the mouse about what had happened. And they're both really sad about it. So the mouse cooks their meal and then jumps in the pot like the sausage had to season the food, but was quickly scalded and her hair and skin came off and she died.
That's kind of quick and blunt.
It is. And so she's dead. The sausage is dead. So the bird becomes very angry and begins throwing wood around the cottage, which caused some of the wood to land around the fireplace and catch fire. So the bird rushes outside to gather water from the well, but the bucket falls into the well, dragging the bird with it, where he also drowns. So now they're all
Yep.
dead.
That's kind of what I expected.
So
Just knowing that it's a Grimm story.
it is. So I'm guessing this is a don't fix it if it ain't
If it ain't
broke.
broke, don't fix it. Yeah.
Kind of scenario. I'm not sure what this is really. I guess that's kind of what it's trying to teach you. And also, maybe be thankful for what you have. And
What did the sausage do, though?
I really
It
don't
never gives a clear explanation as to what the sausage did
I don't know. The
or
poor old
was supposed to
sausage,
have done.
the poor old sausage, I guess, never had a chance. So anyway, I think the dog just wanted the sausage and just told a lie. But whatever. Poor old sausage. Poor old mouse. All because the bird wanted to change jobs.
The mouse got the worst of it
Oh, definitely.
by far.
Oh, definitely. For our next tale, we're going to talk about the nightingale and the blind worm. So there was once this nightingale and a blind worm, and they each had only one eye. They lived together in harmony in a house. One day, the nightingale was invited to a wedding, and she didn't want to go to the wedding with just one eye, so she asked the blind worm if she could borrow her eye. So the worm, out of kindness, allowed the nightingale to borrow her. But the next day, when the nightingale came home from the wedding, She decided she didn't like having just one eye anymore, so she refused to give the worm back her eye.
That's kind of a dick move.
Very much so. So the blind worm then vows revenge on the nightingale and the nightingale's children. But the nightingale only cruelly replied, "See if you can find me. I'll build my nest in the linden so high, so high, so high, you'll never be able to find it, no matter how hard you try."
So this just seems more like it's teaching how something came to be rather than there being a moral to the story.
Well, we're not done yet.
Well, so far anyway.
Right, exactly. So there's one more little bit. Saying then, they're saying that since the time that the worm vowed revenge for the nightingale for having two eyes, since that time, all nightingales now have two eyes, and all the blind worms have none. But whenever the nightingale builds a nest, a blind worm lives in the bushes beneath the tree and constantly climbs up the tree to pierce the egg of her enemy and drink them up.
So don't cheat someone or else they'll come and eat your kids.
I guess so. There you go. I guess that's the moral of the story. Okay, so this next one is called the Stolen Farthings, and it's also known as the Stolen Pennies. It's a little sad as opposed to the others, which were, so bright and cheery, of course.
Don't know. That other one, the first one seemed pretty sad.
Oh, really? You thought that one was sad? Well, I'm shocked. So basically, there's this father, and they're sitting at the table with his wife and his children, and he has a good friend there who has come to visit. So as the clock was striking 12 o'clock, the door opens, and the friend sees this very pale child dressed in snow white clothes, and the child comes in the house. It doesn't look around or speak, but went straight into the next room, and then after a short while, the child emerges from the room and just leaves.
Or that's starting out fairly strong.
Right, starting out a little weird. So this guy sitting there sees this little kid just open the door, come in, and goes into the room and then leaves. So the next day comes, the child comes again, behaves in the same way. Comes to the door, comes in, goes to the next room, leaves without saying anything to anyone, interacting with anyone, or anything. So on the third day, the friend asked the father of the house whose child this was and why did it arrive every day at noon and then go into the other room and just leave without speaking with anyone. And the father said he'd never seen the child and also did not know whose child it could be. So basically, the friend is the only one that's seeing this child.
That's definitely strange.
Right. And I'm not sure why they're the only one that sees it, but they're the only one that is seeing.
Ghost kid.
So on the last day, the child arrives and the friend points out the child to the father who did not see it. And the mother and the children had heard them talking and asked what they were talking about. So he tells the mother basically what he saw and he describes the child. And so she says, "That's my child that died a few months ago."
So yeah, ghost kid.
Right. And so hearing this, they decided to take up the floorboards, and there they found 2 farthings or 2 pennies or whatever hidden in the openings between the boards where the room where the kid kept going. And they realized that this was causing the child to not be able to rest in its grave. So they give the money to a poor man, and the child was never seen again.
That actually kind of reminds me of The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe.
A little, yeah. I mean,
Well, with the thing being hidden in the floorboards
right,
and all.
hidden in the floorboards, right. So, yeah, it's basically this child had hidden these pennies or whatever, farthings in the floorboards and kept coming back looking for them. And that begs the question, is the child going to keep chasing after these pennies, though? Is it going to start haunting this man now that they've given him the pennies? Or did he just want something done with the pennies? Just want them to know the pennies were there? I don't know. It never says. So,
Also, why is it called the stolen pennies? Who did he steal them from?
I don't know.
Or were they stolen
I'm guessing
from
they were
him?
supposed to be stolen from him. I suppose.
And if that's the case, why would somebody steal and then hide 2 pennies or farthing?
All right. I don't know if they're technically stolen from him, like somebody actually took them from him, or just stolen because he was dead and he couldn't get them anymore. Kind of stolen, maybe. I don't know if that's what it means. It never really specifies, but anyway. So the last one is called Clever Hans. Now this one doesn't really have what I would say a bad ending, as in like
This one's just kind of sad from what I remember.
It's a little, well, it's kind of silly, really. I mean, it's kind of silly.
Silly and sad, and the ending is weird.
The ending is very weird. So basically, there's this boy named Hans, and his mother tells him that while he goes away to visit Gretel, which is a neighbor's house, that he's to behave. And he replies that he would, and he heads out. So he goes over to Grethel's, and she asks him what he has brought with him to give her, and he says he's brought nothing, but instead he wants something to be given to him, which is, of course, what you do when you go to someone's house. You
Yep.
just, ask for something. So she gives him a needle, and he takes it and sticks it into a hay cart. And where he gets the hay cart, I don't know. I don't know if he had it with him. I have no clue. And he heads for home. Now, of course, if you got a needle, definitely you'd want to stick it in a pile of hay.
Yep.
Of course.
There's nothing easier than finding a
Exactly.
needle in the haystack.
There you go. So he gets home, and his mother asks him what he gave Gretel, and he says he didn't give her anything, but she gave him something instead. So he tells her the needle, and when asked where it was, he says he put it in the hay cart, and of course couldn't find it anymore. And his mother tells him, that he should have stuck it in his sleeve where it could be found again. So he goes, "Oh, I'll do better next time." So then the next day he heads out again to Grethel's. And again, of course, his mother tells him to behave, and he agrees and takes off on his way. So once again, he gets to Grethel's and tells her again that he didn't bring anything, but he wants something to be given to him. So this time she gives him a knife, and he sticks this up his sleeve and heads home. Like his mother told him, he should stick it up his sleeve.
Well, yeah.
Because, what else would you do? I guess if it works for the needle, it'll work for the knife. So he gets home, and his mother asks him, what he took to Gretel. Again, he tells her he didn't take anything. She gave him something, and then when she asks what he was given, he reaches up his sleeve and pulls out the knife, and she tells him, you shouldn't have stuck that up your sleeve. You should have put that in your pocket instead. And again, he says he'll do better next time.
And he definitely does.
Of course. You can tell right off the bat that he's definitely learning his lessons each time.
Well, yeah, he's only doing what his mother tells him to.
Oh, there you go. So, of course, the next day he sets out again, and he goes to Grethel's empty-handed and asks her what she'll give him. So this time she gives him a goat.
Okay.
And he takes the goat and ties its legs together and sticks it in his pocket. How he does this, I have no clue.
The big pocket.
Big pocket, small goat. There we go. But upon arriving home with the goat, he realizes that it's suffocated, and after his mother finds out what happened, she tells him that he should have done better, and of course he again says he'll do better next time. So once again, he heads over to poor old Grethel's house, and again says he brought nothing, and he asks what she'll give him. So this time she gives him a piece of bacon, and he ties the bacon to a rope and drags it behind him.
Okay, bacon as in bacon,
right?
Or bacon as in pig bacon?
Like as in pig bacon, as a piece of bacon, like.
No, I mean an actual pig or just bacon?
Just a piece of bacon. Not the pig, just the bacon. He ties it to a rope and drags it behind him. I don't know why.
That's a pretty big bacon.
I don't know. Anyway. So while he's doing this, some dogs come out and they devour the bacon. And when he gets home with just the rope in his hand, he has to tell his mother again what had happened and how he lost what he'd been given. And again, he tells her that he'll do better. Right.
All right, then.
The next day, he heads out to Grethel's again. And after asking what she'll give him, she gives him a calf. So he takes the calf, but the calf kicks him in the face, and he decides to leave it behind. And he returns home again empty-handed and has to tell his mother how he lost another gift, and again says,
I'll do better.
There you go. So the next day, when he goes back to Grethel's and says he doesn't have anything and asks what she'll give him, she says, I will go with thee. Because, of course, why would she not?
All right.
So he takes her and ties her to a rope and leads her to a rack and binds her to it.
Okay.
And so he's got her tied to this rack. Then when he gets home and his mother asks what Gretel had given him this time, he says that she's come with him. So she asks, well, where is she? And he says that he had led her by the rope tied to the rack and that he had scattered some grass down for her.
Well, why not?
Well, of course. He's a very hospitable host. So his mother tells him that this isn't the correct way to handle a woman and that he should have looked upon Gretel with kind and friendly eyes. So Hans, being the clever man that he is, goes out to the stable, cuts out all the calf and sheep's eyes, and throws them in Gretel's face.
Well, that's, I can't even say he's doing what his mother told him.
I don't really know.
I see the connection.
I don't know what he was thinking here. So she gets mad, tears herself loose, and runs away. But then she later comes back and decides to be his bride.
Well, I guess it
So the
worked.
moral of the story is I have no clue.
I guess it's cut out eyes, throw them at the woman you love, and there we go.
And yeah, apparently she will become angry, but she'll get over it. So
Yeah,
don't
it's a
worry.
ritual.
Right. Don't worry, guys. She will get over it and will come back and be your bride. So just, keep going over to your woman's house, asking her what she's going to give you until she finally goes with you. She just gets tired of you coming over and she'll finally go on with you. And you just tie her up, carry her on back to your house, give her some grass, and then throw some eyeballs at her, and then you'll have the love of your life. I mean,
Well, if only
easy.
I'd known it was that
I
easy.
mean, it's so easy. So easy. Okay, so now we're going to talk about some of the more well known tales. And the first one we're going to start with is Snow White. Now, we've all probably heard this one, different variations. There are some darker ones that follow the Snow White one, like Snow White and the Huntsman and stuff like that. They're a little more aligned with the real tale a little bit. But none of them I have quite the ending that this one does. This one has an ending that is very interesting. We'll just say that. Okay, so this tale starts out in winter, and there's this queen, and she's sitting at her black ebony embroidery frame, and she's working by the window. And as she's working, she pricks her finger, and from the wound drops 3 drops of blood, and it falls onto the snow. And she looks at how red this blood looks on this white snow. And she says, "Oh, that I had a child as white as snow, as red as blood, and as black as my embroidery frame." So soon after, she has a daughter, and her skin is as white as snow, her lips are as red as blood, and her hair is as black as ebony. And she named her Snow White.
Well, that's a weird wish, first of all.
It is a very weird
You just
wish.
prick your finger, see the blood, and that's the first thing that comes into your mind.
Right, exactly. She wanted a hair as black as that embroidery frame, her lips as red as blood, and her skin as white as snow, which, if you really think about somebody who looked like that,
That's an albino.
they are very weird looking. That would be a very
The
strange
white
looking
skin
person.
thing is an albino.
Right.
That's
Skin that white
fairly realistic.
would be really weird but I'm guessing
It's kind of realistic.
right.
If they're going for the albino.
I don't think they are, considering she
Probably
has
not.
black hair. So
Yeah, that's kind of what's getting me. The really red lips and the black hair.
Right. So in the description,
Looks like in my mind, makes me think of a ghoul kind of.
It would be very weird looking.
A very pasty looking vampire like.
It would be very weird if they actually looked like that. But anyway. So right after the birth of the baby, the queen dies, and her father, the king, he decides to take another wife. And the wife is a very beautiful woman, but she's very proud and overbearing, and she cannot bear to be surpassed in beauty by anyone. And she has this magic looking glass. And she would stand before it and look at her image and say, "Looking glass upon the wall, who is the fairest of us all?" And the looking glass would then reply, "You are fairest of them all." And of course, this made her very happy. And she knew the looking glass always told the truth. So she was, very proud of her beauty. And
she was vain.
Very vain, very, very vain.
Good old wicked step.
Exactly. Now, with each passing year, Snow White grew prettier and prettier. And when she was just 7 years old, she was far more beautiful than the queen. So one day the queen again goes to her looking glass, and asks, who is the fairest of them all? But this time the looking glass replies, "Queen, you are full fair, 'tis true, but Snow White fairer is than you." So the queen, of course, took this all in stride and went on her way, and was like, "Well, we'll just let it go."
Her.
Of course, that's the end of the story,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, what else could possibly happen? Well, of course, no, she did not do that at all. She became green with envy, angered, enraged, and her heart turned against Snow White from that very moment, and she just absolutely hated her.
7-year-old girl
was
be more beautiful than
her.
her.
And from then on, she just hated her. And this hatred grew, they said, like ill weeds in her heart every day, and she could take it no more.
Remind me of the Grinch.
Oh, yeah. So the queen sends for a huntsman and tells him to take the child into the woods and kill her, basically. And then for proof, she asks that he cut out her heart and bring it back to her as a token.
Yes. She can definitely identify this 7-year-old girl by her heart.
Definitely, of course. I mean, how could you not? I mean, a heart is definitely...
Also, sure, this random man will just murder a 7-year-old girl.
Right. But he agrees. and he leads the girl away. So they get out in the woods, and he draws his cutlass to pierce the child's heart.
People must have had real different values back then.
Apparently so, definitely. So anyway, he pulls out his sword, and he's going to kill her. And she, of course, is crying and everything. And she says, "Oh, dear huntsman, do not take my life. I will go into the wild wood and never come home again." And as she is so lovely, the huntsman takes pity on her, and he lets her escape, for he thought the wild animals would be sure to devour her anyway.
Mm.
So maybe not quite so kind. He just wouldn't be the one with the blood on his hands.
Yeah.
So right after she runs into the woods, a young boar runs by. So he takes this as a sign, and he kills it and cuts out his heart and takes it back to the queen and tells her that it's Snow White's heart. Which the queen, of course, takes it, has it salted, cooked up, and eats it, as you would, if someone brought you something like that. What else would you do? Of course.
See, so she was planning on eating a heart of a 7-year-old girl.
She was, and she thought she did, and she thought that was the end of Snow White. Snow White's dead, she's eaten her heart, so it's all good. She's the fairest of them all again.
I guess another ritual thing. She absorbed her beauty.
It doesn't say that, but it does kind of make you wonder if maybe that's what she thought. Maybe, I don't know, kind of Elizabeth Bathory thing or something here. I don't know.
This is not the first time I've heard of something like
right.
that.
So that could have very well been the case. It didn't specify that was the reason she did it. I mean, I'm guessing she just did it because she's mean and cruel, but that could have been possibly part of it. I don't know.
Also, she couldn't identify a human heart from a boar heart.
I don't know. I don't know if she ever really even looked at it. Who knows? I mean, maybe he just brought it to her and it was wrapped up in a cloth, and he just said it was her heart, and she just took it at face value and just gave it to the cook.
To look at it to
I don't
cook
know.
it. Well, yeah, I guess she could have.
She probably didn't cook it. She probably gave it to a cook and they cooked it. I don't know. Who knows? I don't know. Maybe it was cut up, put in something. I don't know.
Also, she ate a heart.
She ate a heart.
In general.
Exactly. Because, I mean, well, why wouldn't you? I mean, it obviously looked very appetizing, I'm sure. Right. So now we cut back to Snow White, and she's alone in the woods, of course, feeling full of terror, finding even the leaves in the trees frightening, of course, but she's just a little girl, which also makes you think that this girl's only 7 years old. Now, in the Disney movies, she looked to be like a teenager or something. Now, this is a little bitty girl out in the woods all by herself, probably never been outside the castle, really, so to speak, because she's kind of like a princess, so she probably didn't know anything. So she takes off running through the woods, and of course she doesn't know what she's going to do for the night, for shelter, food, anything. And as she begins to run, of course, the stones are, cutting her feet, the thorns are tearing at her clothes, and she hears these wild beasts chasing her, though they do not harm her. And she keeps running, and she comes upon this little house, and she decides to go inside to rest. And everything in the house is very small, but it's pretty and it's as clean as possible. And there she sees a little table, and it's set with a white cloth and 7 little plates, 7 little knives and forks, and 7 little drinking cups.
Well, is it small by grown standards or by little tiny 7-year-old girls?
I'm guessing by her standards as well. So I'm guessing they're smaller than her because it says it's small. So I'm guessing that it's small even by her standards. It's smaller than her.
Doors must be pretty small.
They must be pretty small. So over near the wall, she sees these 7 little beds side by side covered by these little white quilts. And she's very hungry and thirsty, and she wants something to eat and drink, of course. But she doesn't want to eat all the portions off of one plate. So she eats a little bit from every plate and drinks 1 drop from every wine cup. And as she's, of course, very tired, she decides she wants to lay down and take a nap. So she goes to the first bed, but of course it didn't suit her as it was too long. Another was too short, and she went through all the beds until she finally found one that felt just right, which was the 7th one. And so she lays down and she falls asleep. So this kind of gives you Goldilocks themes here too, I guess, sort of where she couldn't find the right bed or whatever. But she finally found the right bed, and she lays down and she goes to sleep. So as she's sleeping, it gets dark, and the masters of the house return. So they are the 7 dwarfs whose job was to dig underground among the mountains. And they came in and they lit their little candles, their 7 little candles, and it was bright enough to see inside the cabin, and they looked around and saw that things were not as they had left them.
Well, that's kind of a smart idea, I guess, sleeping in a strange house.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, who would ever want to harm a 7-year-old girl?
There you go. I guess she had no other. I don't know. She didn't know what to do, so maybe she was just taking her chances, and maybe she thought she might even wake up and be gone before they got back. I don't know what she.
Or maybe she was hoping it was all a dream. Who
Or
knows?
they would take kindness on her. Maybe that as well. So the first one comes in. He says, "Who's been sitting in my little chair?" The second one says, "Who's been eating with my little plate?" And it goes on. One of them saying, "Who's been doing this?" Blah blah blah. And then the first one notices that there's a hollow on his little bed, and he goes over and says, "Well, who's been laying on my bed?" And all the others run over and they see that someone's been on their beds too. And then the seventh one saw that there was a girl in his bed asleep. So he calls them all over and they all come over to her and they're like, "Oh goodness, oh gracious, what beautiful child is this?" And they were filled with such joy that they didn't want to wake her. So in the morning, she wakes up and she sees him. And of course, she's very frightened because there's 7 little men standing around her. But they seemed quite friendly and they asked her what her name was and she told them, and then she told them what had happened and why she was there in their home. So she told them about, being took out into the woods to be sacrificed, whatever, for her stepmother and everything. So they know the story and they know what's going on. So basically they tell her that if she will keep their house while they work and had supper waiting for them when they come home at night, that she could stay with them and want for nothing. And of course she readily agrees.
Kind of reminds me of the story with 3 bears.
Right.
Forgot the name of the story.
Goldilocks and
Goldilocks. Yeah, that was it. Just kind of reminds me of that.
It does. So they warned her that the stepmother would, of course, soon know that she was probably there and to not let anyone in the house. So the queen is so filled with confidence after the eating heart of her rival, which is, of course, again, a 7-year-old child. So she goes to her looking glass and asks, "Looking glass upon the wall, who is the fairest of us all?" And the glass answers, "Queen, thou art beauty rare, but Snow White living in the glen with 7 little men is 1,000 times more fair." And of course, again, she becomes enraged because the glass always spoke the truth and she knew the huntsman had lied to her and that the child lived. So she quickly devises a plan and she paints her face up and dresses like an old peddler woman. And she goes out to the little dwarf's cabin and starts knocking on the door saying, "Fine wares to sell." And Snow White peeps out the window and sees the old woman and, asks her, what she got to sell. And the old woman says, "Good wear, fine wares, laces of all colors," and all this. So she thought there was no harm in letting this little woman in and seeing what she had and checking out her wares. Now, of course, they had told her not to do this, but again, you got to think, this is a child. She's supposedly only 7 years old. And now, it doesn't say that she's aged any at this point, so I don't know if some time is supposed to have passed or what. So, I don't know if we're still supposed to assume that she's still 7, but she's still pretty young anyway.
Yeah. I imagine, at the very least, a few days had to have passed.
So basically then the old woman comes in and tells Snow White to come and let her lace her up properly for once, which I guess is lacing up the bodice or whatever, tightening it or whatever. So Snow White, suspecting nothing, goes and lets the woman lace up her bodice with the new lace. But the old woman does this so quickly and so tightly that it takes Snow White's breath away and she falls down, appearing to be dead. "And now you are done with being the fairest," the old woman says, and runs away into the forest, I guess laughing and clapping herself on the back. So that night, the dwarfs come home and they find her laying lifeless on the floor and they see how tight she's laced up into her bodice and they cut it away. And little by little, she starts coming around and she tells them what had happened, that the old woman had come out, sold her the lace. And they basically told her, that was your stepmother, of course, and she was tricking you and to not let anyone in the house unless they were there. And they tell her this again, and
That's
she agrees.
a fairly good lesson there.
I would say so. So, of course, I'm sure that nothing else is probably going to happen at this point. So the queen returns home and goes to her looking glass and is again told that Snow White is 1,000 times more fair. And she then decides to find a plan that's going to finally be Snow White's ruin. And by witchcraft, she makes a poisoned comb. And she dresses up like the peddler woman, heads out to the cabin, but this time Snow White told her to go away, as she was not to let anyone in. But the woman says, "Well, you can look, can't you? You weren't forbidden from that." So she looks out, and she sees the poison comb, and it pleases her so much that she's tempted by it, and she opens the door and lets her in again.
Hmm.
And the old woman then tells her to let her comb her hair properly, as it doesn't look like it's been combed properly in a while. So she, of course, lets her do this.
So Snow White's a moron.
She's a little dumb at this point, I gotta say. Yes, because this is supposed to be just very shortly after this first incident. So the queen combs her hair, and as she does so, the poison begins to take effect, and she falls again down to the ground, appearing to be dead. So the dwarfs get back home, and they find her laying there with a comb in her hair, and they take the comb out of her hair, and again, the poison starts, I guess, to dissipate in her system or whatever, and she starts to come around, and she comes back to life. The queen goes home again, asks the looking glass the same thing as before, and she's shook with anger when, of course, the looking glass tells her that she's still not the fairest of them all. So then she decides that Snow White is going to die, even if it should cost her her own life. So she makes a poisonous apple, and it is so perfect and beautiful that anyone that saw it would long for it, but whoever ate even a small bite would die. So once again, she dresses up, paints her face as though peddler woman, and goes out to the cabin. And again, Snow White tells her she's not allowed to let anyone in. And after a bit of talking, Snow White could no longer resist the lure of this apple, and she takes it. And no sooner than she took a bite, she falls to the ground dead.
Alright, yeah. Snow White's a moron.
Now, I gotta say, she is not the most intelligent child at this point. Now, this time when the queen gets home, of course, and asks the looking glass who was the fairest, the glass finally replies that she was the fairest of all now. So the dwarfs come home, and they find that Snow White is dead. And they check to see if there was anything that could be done like before, like cutting away the lace or taking the comb out of her hair, or whatever, and they couldn't find anything to do. So they couldn't bear the thought to bury her because she's such a beautiful child. So they decided to make a coffin out of glass so that it can be looked into from all sides, and they put her in it. And they place this coffin on top of a mountain, and they leave one of them to guard it at all times. And she lays in this coffin as if she were asleep, and she never changes. So I don't know if she's still supposed to be a child at this point, or if some more time has passed, and maybe she is maybe more of a teenager at this point. But whatever, she's not aging anymore. She looks like she's asleep. She's in this big glass box.
Alright then, this is definitely taking a turn from the stories that we grew up listening
It definitely, yeah. It's a weird one. So anyway, one day there's this prince out, and he sees the coffin, and he asks the dwarf that's watching over it to sell it to him, and that he would pay any price he asked because he could not bear not to look upon this girl. Yeah, because that's not weird at all. That's not a weird request in any way whatsoever.
Not at all.
So, yeah. The dwarfs, they take pity on him, and they allow him to have the coffin. So he calls his servants over to take the coffin away. And they pick it up, start carrying it off on their shoulders. And as they're walking along, one of them stumbles on the path, and they shake the coffin violently. And that causes the piece of the apple to come free from her throat, and she opens her eyes, throws up in the lid of the coffin, and sits up.
Wait, so she never swallowed the apple?
Apparently not. Apparently it was stuck in her throat this whole time.
Okay, and she's still not dead?
No, I'm guessing it was some kind of the magical poison. I don't know.
That would have meant that she was still technically alive.
Right.
Logically speaking.
Right. She's
then
alive.
Again, this is magic, not logic.
She's alive and basically sort of in a comatose state. But yes.
Well, that's not too dissimilar from the Disney.
Right. So she starts looking around, of course, and asks what happened. So the prince tells her, what had happened to her, about she'd ate the apple, whatever, and that she had passed out, and they put her in that coffin, and whatever. And he tells her that he wanted her more than anything in the world, and to come with him to his father's castle to be his bride. Because, love at first sight again, apparently. I have no clue. And once again, I do not know how old she is. I don't know if she's still supposed to be 7. We're going to say no, that she's older.
I hope not.
But yes. So he takes her off to his father's castle to be his bride. They get to the castle, and of course they plan this big wedding and feast, to celebrate the prince getting married. So the stepmother is invited, and she decides to dress up in her finest clothes. But before she leaves, she goes to the looking glass, of course, to look at herself again and asks, who is the fairest? And the looking glass replies, "O queen, although you are beauty rare, the young bride is 1,000 times fairer." So the queen, of course, is pissed. She, just rails and curses and she's just beside herself with rage because someone now is more beautiful than her again.
I can't really blame her.
Yeah,
She keeps coming back.
Well, she doesn't know yet that it's Snow White. She just knows that it's somebody that's prettier than her. They just said the young bride, so she actually doesn't know that it's Snow White yet. So
Oh,
she
yeah, you're right.
does think that Snow White is
Gonna get
still
even more
dead.
mad then.
Exactly. So she's pissed. First, she thought she's not going to go to the feast. She's just going to say, to heck with it. But then she knew that she would never have any peace at all until she saw who this bride was. So she gets ready, she goes, and she gets there and she sees that it's Snow White. But this time she doesn't have any time to be angry because she's then forced to put on red hot iron shoes and dance until she dies. And that was the end of the old queen. And I suppose Snow White went on to live. I guess she maybe got a happily ever after because it didn't say she didn't.
Yeah.
But that's an interesting death. Red hot iron shoes, and she had to dance until she died.
That is pretty brutal.
That is very brutal.
I can admire that.
How long would that take? That does not
take a
seem like
while.
that would be
It would be very slow.
that would be a very slow and brutal death. Yes, it would. Next, we're going to do Cinderella. Now, this is one that I like the story of Cinderella. I always like the movie and everything. So now we're going to hear the real story of Cinderella. So basically, there was this rich man whose wife was sick and she felt that she was dying. Her end was drawing near. So she calls out to her daughter to come to her. And she says, "Dear child, be pious and good, and God will always take care of you, and I will look down upon you from heaven and will be with you." So she closes her eyes and she dies. So the girl, of course, is distraught, and she goes out every day to her mother's grave and weeps, and she always tries to be pious and good like her mother told her. And then the winter comes, and the snow covers the grave in a white covering, and the sun came in the early spring and melted it away. And the man decides he's going to, again, take another wife.
Well, that was blunt. So she's just talking to her little girl and then dead.
Mm-hmm. So some time's passed, of course, he's found a new wife, and he brings her home, and with her she brings 2 daughters. And they're actually, in the story, they're beautiful and fair in appearance, so they're not ugly like on the movie or whatever. But at their heart, they was black and ugly, so they were very cruel and hateful people. So they began very evil things against the girl. They started, calling her names, talking ugly to her. They would let her sleep in the same room or sit in the same room with them or whatever. They told her if she wanted to eat food, she had to earn it, and made her a kitchen maid.
All right then. So I guess that part goes along with the Disney
Right.
movie.
So they basically made her a servant. So every day she's getting up, she's doing all this heavy work from morning to night. She's drawing the water, making the fires, cooking, washing, whatever. And while she's doing this, the sisters are, of course, tormenting her. And one of the things they would do is they would throw dried peas and lentils among the ashes, and then they'd make her sit down and pick them out in the evenings. So she would be, dirty and tired and covered in cinders from the fireplace and whatever. And so they started calling her Cinderella.
All right, that does make sense.
So that's
Cinders and all that.
Right. So that's where she got her name. She was always covered in dirt and was dirty or whatever.
So wait, she had no name before this?
Well, it doesn't say it. No.
Interesting.
So the name stuck, and everyone basically called her Cinderella, even her father. So one day, the father, he's going to go out to the fair, and he asks the stepdaughters what they would like him to bring back for them. And one of them says, fine clothes. The other one says pearls and jewels. And then he asks Cinderella, "Well, what do you want?" And she says, "I want the first twig, father, that strikes against your hat on the way home. And that's what I would like for you to bring me." So he brought back the first 2 stepdaughters fine clothes, pearls, and jewels. And on his way back, as he rode through the lane, a hazel twig struck against his hat, and he broke it off and carried it home for Cinderella. When he reached home, he gave the stepdaughters what they wished for, and Cinderella, he gave her the hazel twig, and she thanked him and went to her mother's grave. And there she planted the twig, and her weeping was so bitter that the tears fell upon it and watered it and flourished it, and it became a fine tree.
Oh, huh.
So, yeah, that's kind of sad too.
Yeah, it's fairly sad.
Right,
Although not for the it's not as sad for the reasons I was expecting it to be.
right. Cinderella then starts going out 3 times a day to this tree and her mother's grave, and she weeps and she prays. And every time she does this, a white bird rises from the tree, and if she utters any wish, the bird brought her whatever she wished for. So there's this bird in the tree that will bring her whatever she wishes.
Well, that's fairly different. I can't say I've heard that
Oh,
before.
no. Then it comes to pass that the king of this country, he ordains this festival that should last for 3 days. And he bids all the young women to come, and the king's son, the prince, is going to choose a bride from among them. So he's basically planned this big feast, festival, whatever, and he's invited all the beautiful young women from near and far, whatever, to come so that his son, the prince, can choose a bride. So the stepdaughters, heard about it, and they were, of course, pleased, and they wanted to go. So they called for Cinderella to comb out their hair, brush their shoes, and, make their buckles and everything all fancy, everything so that they could go to this wedding feast at the king's castle. When Cinderella heard this, she couldn't help but cry because she would have liked to go to the dance too, and she begged her stepmother to allow her. And the stepmother was like, and all your dust and dirt, you can't go to the festival. You'll have no dress or shoes, and who would want to dance with you anyway? So she persists in asking, and the stepmother said, I strewed a dish full of lentils in the ashes. If you can pick them all up again in 2 hours, you may go with us. Then the maiden, of course, she goes to the back door, let out in the garden, and she calls out, O gentle doves, O turtle doves, all the birds that be, the lentils that in the ashes lie, come and pick them up for me. The good must be put in the dish, the bad you may eat if you wish. So she basically calls in birds to do this for her.
Not a bad idea. Fairly smart, using what she's got.
Right. So then these birds start coming in, these white doves, turtle doves, and then there's like this crowd of other birds chirping and fluttering, and they all sit upon the ashes and they start picking out the lentils and putting the good grains into a dish. And before half an hour was over, it was all done and they flew away. So Cinderella took the dish to the stepmother, feeling joyful and thinking that now she should go with them to the feast. And she said, all this is of no good to you. You cannot come with us, for you have no proper clothes. You cannot dance, and you would put us to shame. So she turns her back on poor Cinderella and made haste to set up her daughters to get them ready. So Cinderella's all upset. She goes out to her mother's grave under the hazel tree or bush and starts to cry. And she says, little tree, shake over me, that silver and gold may come down and cover me. Then the bird threw a dress down of gold and silver and a pair of slippers that were embroidered, and they were silk and silver. And in all the haste, she put on the dress and went to the festival. But the stepmother and sisters did not know her and thought that she must be a foreign princess because she looked so beautiful in this golden dress. Right. So Cinderella didn't think anything about it or whatever. And they thought, of course, she's still sitting at home picking lentils out of the ashes or whatever. So the king's son, he sees her and he comes over to meet her and he takes her by the hand and he dances with her. And he refused to stand or go up to anybody else so that he might not be obliged to let go of her hand. And when anyone came to claim it, he answered, she is my partner. So he basically had claimed her. He found her. This was the one he wanted, basically.
I'm actually beginning to see a pattern, and I'm beginning to think the heads over at Disney really have something against stepmothers.
No, really. They apparently do.
It's like every story, every princess story. There's always a wicked step.
There seems to be, yeah. So then evening comes and she starts to want to go home. And the prince said that he would go with her to take care of her, and he also wanted to see where she lived. But during the trek home, she escapes and she jumps up and climbs up into the pigeon house at her farm or house or whatever. He waits until her father comes home and he tells about her. He says, what she looked like and whatever. And the father's like, well, that can't be Cinderella. And he calls for axes and hatches and had the pigeon house cut down, and there was no one in it. And when they entered the house, there sat Cinderella in her dirty clothes among the cinders, and a little oil lamp burned dimly in the chimney. For Cinderella had been very quick, and she jumped out of the pigeon house and ran back up into the regular house. So they leave and whatever, and she takes the dress and she takes it out to her mother's grave and lays it on the grave, and the bird comes down and he carries it away again. So the next day, when the festival begins again, and the parents and the stepsisters had gone to it and everything, she goes back out to the hazel bush and she again cries, little tree, shake over me that silver and gold may come down and cover me. The bird then cast down an even more splendid dress than on the first day. When she appeared, all the guests were even more astonished by her beauty and everything. So the prince had been waiting until she came. He took her hand and danced with her. And of course, when anybody came over to invite her to dance, she kept saying, he kept saying rather, this is my partner, whatever. So the evening comes again and she wants to go home. And again, he follows her for he wanted to see what house she belonged to. But she breaks away from him and runs into the garden at the back of the house. And there stood a fine, large tree bearing splendid pears. And she leapt as lightly as a squirrel among the branches, and the prince did not know what had become of her. So, yeah, I don't know. She jumps up in this tree so quickly.
She's very agile.
She is very agile. Once again, he waits until the father comes home, and he tells the same tale, about this strange maiden, how she ran away from him and jumped up in this tree. So, again, the father thinks to himself, well, this can't be Cinderella or whatever. So, he calls for an axe, so he's going to cut down the tree. Then there's no one in it again. So, they run back and find Cinderella, who had already jumped down out of the tree from the other side. I don't know how they didn't see her, but anyway, they didn't see her. And she'd already taken her, changed her clothes, put her dress back out by the grave or whatever, and was wearing her old normal clothes again.
She's fast.
She is very fast as well.
Fast and agile.
Mm-hmm. Extremely.
Not to mention she's got magic birds on her side.
There you go.
Maybe Disney wasn't too far off.
Right. So now it's the third day of the festival, and of course, the parents and the stepdaughters or whatever, they've set off, and she goes out to the grave again, says the same thing, little tree, shake over me, that silver and gold may come down and cover me. So the bird then casts down another dress, but this one is even more splendid, or rather, and brilliant, and these slippers were made out of gold. And when she appeared at this dress at the festival, nobody knew what to say because they were such in wonder of her beauty. And of course, again, the prince danced with her and wouldn't let anybody else dance with her and kept saying, she is my partner. So evening comes to pass again, and she wants to go home. And he wanted to go with her, but she this time ran past him so quickly that he couldn't follow. So she just lights out. She's gone.
Well, it's already been established. She's got the speed.
She's got the speed. But it's time he's got a plan. And he had them to spread pitch down on the steps out front of the castle. So as she's running down, one of her shoes, her left shoe, gets stuck to the step, and she leaves it there.
I guess we can see where this is going.
So the prince, he finds the shoe, and he sees that it's made out of gold, and it's very small and slender. The next morning, he goes to his father, the king, and tells him that none should be his bride, but the one whose foot would fit this golden shoe.
Once again, someone
picking somebody for their feet.
Yeah.
So there's another that ties in with the mythology. I guess feet are more important than we ever realized.
Apparently so.
So basically news about this spread around, and the two sisters, they're very glad because they thought they had very pretty feet. So they go out, the prince or whatever goes out with the shoe, and he goes to Cinderella's house. Of course, he doesn't know it's Cinderella's house, doesn't know she lives there, doesn't know anything apparently. So the eldest comes down first, and she's going to try on the shoe. And her mother stands by watching, but she can't get her big toe into the shoe. So her mother...
She can't fit a toe into the shoe.
It's too narrow, so she can't fit her big toe in there. So her mother sees that the shoe is too small, so she gives her a knife and tells her to cut off the toe. She says, cut off your toe, because when you're a queen, you'll never have to go on foot. So she does. So the girl cuts her toe off, squeezes her foot into the shoe, conceals her pain, and goes down, and the prince takes her up, and they ride off. As they're riding away, they pass by Cinderella's mother's grave, and the two pigeons are sitting out, or there are two pigeons, I should say, sitting out around this hazel bush, and they cry out. And they say, there they go, there's blood on her shoe, the shoe is too small, not the right bride at all.
Magic pigeons.
Exactly. So the prince, he looks down, he sees the shoe, and then I guess finally notices that there's blood coming out of the shoe. And
I don't know how he wouldn't notice that in the first place.
I do not know.
The whole point is he was trying to find the right foot.
Right.
You think he'd be just staring at it?
You would think so, but apparently not. And then he takes the horse back and takes his false bride home. and, says she's not the right one and that the other sister must now try the shoe on. So, of course, the other sister, she's more than happy to do this. And she goes into her room to do it with her mother, and she's able to get her toes comfortably in, but her heel's too big. It won't fit into the shoe. So
Cut off the heel.
there you go. So the mother gives her a knife and says, cut off a piece of your heel, because when you're a queen, you'll never have to go on foot. So the girl does this. She lops off a piece of her foot, shoves it into the shoe, conceals the pain, and goes down to the prince. And again, he takes her out, and the pigeons again see, and they tell on her.
Yep. Magic pigeon.
Magic pigeons. So again, he looks at her foot and sees blood coming out of her shoe. And again, he turns the horse around and brings the false bride home again. And tells, this is not the right one. Have you no other daughter? And the man says, no, only my dead wife left behind her a little stunted Cinderella. It's impossible that she can be the bride. But the king's son ordered that she be sent for, so the stepmother, she says, oh no, she's much too dirty. I cannot let her be seen. But he wouldn't hear of it, so they bring Cinderella out. But first she washes her face and hands and went in and curtsies to the prince, who holds out the golden shoe. She sits down on a stool right in front of him and slips her foot out of her heavy wooden shoe and puts her foot right into the shoe, fits her perfectly, and he cries out, this is the right bride. And
dun, dun, dun.
Right. And of course, the two sisters and the stepmother, they're mad and they grow pale with anger. But Cinderella, whatever, she's the one. So he picks her up, takes her out, and they ride by the bush. And this time the pigeons say, there they go, there they go. No blood on her shoe. The shoe's not too small. The right bride is she after all. Now, if only that were the ending, of course. But no, there is a bit more. So these two birds, they come out and they fly over to Cinderella and they perch and land on her shoulders and they stay there. So she's now got a bird on each of her shoulders.
Magic pigeon.
The magic pigeons. And she goes on home with the prince and they're going to have the wedding. And the sisters decide that they want to go to this wedding, so they want to curry favor, right? So they go there and everything. And as the bridal party is going to the church, the eldest walks on the right side of Cinderella and the youngest on the left. And as they're walking, the pigeons pluck out one of their eyes and then go and pluck out their other eye. So now they're totally blind. And they are thus punished for their wickedness and falsehood by being blinded for life.
Okay.
So the magic pigeons plucked out their eyes. And that's how it ends.
First off, yay for the magic pigeons. But Jesus Christ.
Right. And apparently they just stood there and let this happen. I don't know. But yeah, I don't know if maybe they were just so wanting to curry favor that they just let whatever happen to them. But yeah, they plucked out their eyes.
Well, I mean, they did mutilate their feet. So.
Oh, yeah. So apparently pain is not something apparently that matters, maybe. I don't know. But that's definitely not the ending that we're used to in Cinderella by any stretch. So, yeah. Now, I don't know what happens to the stepmother. Apparently nothing.
Apparently nothing. She deserves it most. She's the one that made her daughters mutilate their feet.
She made them mutilate the feet, but I reckon in this one, it was pretty much just the daughters that were mean to Cinderella. The mother,
mean to them, yeah.
It never really says that the stepmother was actually mean to her, but she just let it go on. She didn't care. She didn't care about her, so whatever they did was fine.
She was just a bit of a bitch.
There you go.
The other two were just flat out mean to her, I guess.
They were very cool. Right. And so they got blinded.
Cool story.
Yeah.
Very fun and family friendly.
Very fun. So that's going to bring us to the end of this one, this episode, just because we're running a little long. But we are going to come back next week and finish up with the Grimm Brothers and talk about some more of their stories, the truth behind them, I suppose. We're going to ruin some more of your childhood favorites for you, I guess. But yeah.
That would definitely ruin one of mine.
Right. So we definitely want you to come back. And if there's any other stories, any of the lesser known ones that you'd like for us to cover in a future episode, we'd love to, because I have to say this one was very fun and very interesting. And we'd love to hear your comment. And don't forget to like and subscribe, and definitely join us back next week. And don't forget to stay disturbed.